Good morning. Oh my goodness, we have updates.
I'm just doing a little bit of last minute prep here. Oh, goodness. All right, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Let me get my screen share started here. Right. I believe we are right at 9 a.m. and our first presenter does have a hard stop, so I'm going to get going in the interest of time. Thank you for joining us for YIC and Prevention Mentor Webinar Session 46. Let me get our agenda up for this morning. As usual, take care of our welcome and mindfulness moment and introduction of presenters, which will be Holly Bell and Michelle Knight. So this morning for our mindfulness, I thought we would take a moment just to catch our breath together and do a 2-minute guided, all the words at once, 2-minute guided mindfulness meditation for spring. The comment on this video was that it was a simple meditation, but very effective. So let's take a couple minutes and then we'll dive into the 504 content, or excuse me, introductions and then 504 content with Holly.
Welcome to this 2-minute mindfulness meditation practice. Take a moment to find a comfortable position, and then take a few deep breaths. Deep breath in, and a long, slow exhalation. Doing that a couple more times. And returning your breathing to its normal rhythm and bringing your attention to this photo on your screen. We can use a variety of anchors to the present moment, and in this particular case, we're going to use the sense of sight as our anchor to the present. So begin by looking at this picture broadly, noticing the colors and textures, noticing places that are in greater focus and lesser focus. And then taking a moment to focus more specifically on one area of the photo. Perhaps a flower, a blade of grass, the snow. And bringing your attention to that region. Really exploring that region to a greater depth. During this mindfulness practice or others, remember that it's perfectly normal for your mind to wander. You're not doing anything wrong when this happens. It is just the nature of the mind. Each and every time you notice that the mind has wandered, just begin again. In this case, come back to the photo and the sense of sight.
Oops, sorry about that. We are having fun with technology now. There we go. Back to the slideshow. All right, thank you for that. And the few interruptions we had, I had forgotten to make Morgan a co-host, so that was a little bit of a fun mindfulness moment there. So thank you for bearing with me. All right, thank you. So first we have Holly Bell, and she is the Student and Family Rights Specialist for the Utah State Board of Education. She served in this role for 6 years, and she is a passionate advocate for educational equity. She was a school counselor for 8 years and the Jordan School District's secondary ed school counselor specialist for 2 years prior to moving to the Utah State Board of Education. Now she assists schools and districts in Utah in meeting federal and state regulations that protect the rights of students and families. Her number one priority is ensuring each Utah student has access to high-quality education and a safe and inclusive environment. And after Holly, we will be hearing from Michelle Knight, who is our Threat and Crisis Response Support Specialist at the Utah State Board of Education, focusing on digital threat assessment, suicide prevention, and mental health resources for 12 schools. She has presented nationally on the topic of youth suicide prevention and the collaborative effort between state and schools. Michelle co-leads the Mental Health Crisis Response Team at USBE and is Vice President of the National Alliance of School Crisis Responders Board. Michelle is also a member of the Internet Crimes Against Children Advocacy Board, and previously she worked as a project facilitator for the Huntsman's Mental Health Institute at the University of Utah's hospitals and clinics, overseeing the development and implementation of the SafeUT app. While working on her MHA and MBA at Weber State University, Michelle coordinated the $3.4 million merger of the mental health resources in which she oversaw the development of the Utah statewide crisis line and 3-digit text line, which is 988. She is a certified master QPR instructor, prepare instructor, youth mental health first aid instructor, comprehensive school threat assessment guidelines instructor, and protective factors framework instructor. Michelle graduated from Weber State University with a master's of health administration in April of 2019 and a master of business administration in 2019. She lives in Kaysville, Utah with her husband and 2 daughters. Thank you so much for taking time to get to know our presenters. With that, let me stop my screen share and make sure Holly has the ability to start hers. All right, Holly, we'll make you a co-host just in case you have need any of the extra tools.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for that meditation. I didn't know how much I needed it until you put it. If any of you are aware, I'm sure many of you are aware that we just got out of the Utah State Legislative Session. So we're all at the Utah State Board of Education trying to digest it all and see how it applies to our individual specialties. And you may be aware of things that have been happening nationally in my area. So I do oversee technical assistance for the civil rights laws, Section 504 being one of those, and also Title IX and Title VI. So we're going to talk about Section 504, and I think I have talked to this group before, correct? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. You have. I think you were with us either last school year or the school year before. So
Yeah.
for a refresh.
Yeah, this is a great group. So there have been some changes in Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act in 2024. So you're actually getting some information that I haven't formally, I've given some outlines to my 504 coordinators throughout the state, but I haven't really formally presented it. So you're kind of getting some new information that I hope stays around because there's a court case that I'm not going to get into. So that's not to scare you. It's just everything is in flux right now. So there were some really good changes. And this is 504, if you've heard of ADA. So 504 is kind of a cousin to ADAs. They're sort of in the same family with different house rules. So yeah, they expand that a little bit, and I feel like they did a good job. So I hope it stays around. So this is just a basic overview, and part of my job is to be a resource to you. So if you think, if questions come up for you that are maybe out of the scope of this, more specific, you can always reach out to me, and I'm going to give you my contact information. I don't think it shared my screen just then.
No, we're still just on the
Oh, here we go. Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, no pretty purple flowers. Like I said, these are going to be really boring. Hopefully my personality makes up for it.
Okay.
Okay. And I'm only on one screen today. I could not get my other monitor to work. So I'm going to see if I can see the chat, but just in case, will you go ahead and tell me if there's any questions? Because please ask as we go along.
Yeah, I'm happy to monitor the chat. In fact, I added a comment, and since you gave me the opportunity, I'm going to go ahead and share it out. If you all will rename your or add your first and last name to the chat for the roster so we know who's with us, that's appreciated. And Holly, I'll take care of the chat and break in if there's anything there.
Awesome. I can see you. So that's good. And there's no black box on my screen. Okay. All right, let's get started. So I mentioned a little bit about what Section 504 is. It's a federal civil rights law. So it's different than IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. But it does cover all students with disabilities and protects them from discrimination. And as I said there, in 2009, we expanded it through the ADA Amendments Act. And then there have been some additional changes which will help us with this conversation. So all students with disabilities fall under this protection and prohibits discrimination in all school programs and activities. So I'll just throw it out there right now. There's a misunderstanding that this just covers the classroom. It covers everything. This is all about access to FAPE, a free appropriate public education. And it's also not intended to create an unfair advantage. It's created to level the playing field, and so that they can have access to the general education like their similarly situated peers. So the definition of disability changed just a smidge. Really, they just changed the word person to individual. So I haven't caught up on what that means, why. So with respect to an individual, so this is something that really spans the whole life, not just K-12. So in respect to an individual, it's a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of the major life activities of such an individual. It's also a record of such an impairment. So they may have had some kind of 504 or IEP, individualized education program in the past, which would be considered a record, or being regarded as having an impairment. So these are our students who may not have legitimately a disability under the definition, but people treat them like they do. All right. So you may have wondered what some of those things meant because they're not super clear on their at face value. So this is the information that we have, and it still tends to be vague. So a lot of answers to questions that I get about Section 504 are going to be, it depends. And I know that's frustrating, but anything that has to do with serving students with disabilities, or even any student, should be individualized based on their individual needs. So that is something that is constantly stressed over and over again. So if it substantially limits the ability of an individual to perform a major life activity, I'll give you some examples of that, as compared to most people in the general population. So it does not need to prevent or significantly or severely restrict the individual from performing a major life activity to be considered substantially limiting. So substantial limitation is not defined per se, but we need to have a standard that is not up here to be determined to be impacting this individual. So the comparison of the performance of a major life activity to the performance of the same major life activity by most people usually will not require scientific, medical, statistical evidence. Nothing is intended, however, to prohibit or limit the presentation of scientific, medical, or statistical evidence in making such a comparison. And I'm going to put that in more practical terms moving forward, because there are some misconceptions about what is required under Section 504 for eligibility and accommodations and related services. So like I said, substantial limits is broadly construed so that it can cover to the maximum extent permitted by 504. So it's not meant to be a demanding standard, which means don't try to test this child with just all these different assessments to determine if they have a disability. Okay, so here's some examples. Physical or mental impairment. It's defined as any physiological disorder or condition, cosmetic disfigurement, or anatomical loss affecting one or more bodily systems. If you read this list, unless you went to medical school, you might not know what they are, as I do not. But some of them we do see more so in schools. We're seeing definitely some, visual, speech, and hearing impairments. Just so you know, the deaf population does not like the term hearing impairment. So if you have a student who is deaf or hard of hearing, they prefer to be called deaf or hard of hearing, deaf with a capital D. That's just a side note, helps you to be more inclusive. We're seeing more cerebral palsy, epilepsy for sure. Diabetes we see a lot, and I'm sure that you do. Intellectual disability is hard to define. I think they do a better job with students on an individualized education program or IEP. Mental health conditions, I'm sure you are seeing those a lot, and there's something that are misunderstood. I actually had a conversation with one of my colleagues who did not know that mental health conditions can be covered under Section 504. We're talking about our brain here. Our brain is a part of our body, and it has physical functions that can impact our ability to access our education. And I'm sure if you really think deeply about that, you understand why. Dyslexia, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So some of those we know, we're seeing them. Others, probably more your school nurses are aware of, but we should also be aware of as a team who is serving our students. Okay, so here are some major life activities, and these are not exhaustive. And remember, the definition is substantial limitation to one or more major life activities. So it's one or more of these. And it's really a major activity. So we're not just talking about learning in school. We're talking about all these things: caring for oneself, performing manual tasks, seeing, hearing, eating, sleeping, walking, standing, sitting, reaching, writing, lifting, bending, speaking, breathing, learning, reading. It goes on and on forever. And if anything you can think about that you do in your life, we need to make sure that all people are able, as much as possible, can do that when they are in our programs and activities. So, but remember I said that they focus a lot on the classroom. And a lot of people misunderstand, like, we need to make sure that not only can you participate in sports, but you can be a spectator in sports. And there's a lot of people who don't get that. So we're not going to just focus on learning. Ready? Yay. Okay. All together now. Major bodily functions. So this bladder and bowel one, it's come up with some recent legislation that was passed last year. We're not going to get into it, but toilet training in kindergarten has become a major issue. And so that is one of the major bodily functions. And we're looking at a comparison to the general population. And then all of these other examples. And remember, so I said neurological and brain functioning. So that's looking at our students who may have a mental health condition. And this is where I'm saying you need to work with your school nurses, because a lot of those students have an individualized healthcare plan, and we can support that plan where the school nurses aren't necessarily in the same position that y'all are to provide those services. Okay, so here's how the evaluation process should go is what I'm going to say. So 504 doesn't really give us anything definitive as far as what the process should look like. Some things, and I'll mention that, but you know, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and IEPs are very prescriptive. 504 is not, and that can be frustrating, but like I said, it's intended to fill, the individual needs of a child. First step is child find, and you can be involved in this process, and please do. This is, again, a federal law that our schools and our LEAs, so our local education agencies, our districts and charter schools are not aware of. So I'm going to explain more what that is. So then an evaluation, so for referrals received by anyone, you, the neighbor, like a teacher, most often a parent. So they request an evaluation. It's a referral. It doesn't need to be in writing. If you have, they might have a form. You have to get parent or guardian consent. This is like one of the hard stops is parent or guardian consent and giving them procedural safeguards, which are their rights. Because it's parent involvement is a little bit different than it looks like with an IEP. Then they put a group together. This is how the group is defined. They have to be knowledgeable of the child, about the meaning of the data, about the placement options, which means what are we going to have? What do we have to support this child? And they review all of the available evidence. And we're going to talk about, first of all, what available evidence is, everything you have, anything about the child. So, and that's what you got to use to determine eligibility. And then, so eligibility, this is a non-discrimination law, which means that is the first layer. You're determining if this child has a disability, and then you figure out if they need accommodations and related services. Again, often misunderstood. And so those are recorded into 504 plan. There's no requirement of what that looks like. And then they deny, so if they violate if they deny or delay conducting a formal investigation. So this whole wait and see, we need to do interventions until, we can evaluate. No. Sometimes that can be appropriate, but it's not recommended. I'm sure that you were all just loving this. It will be helpful information because you are part of the team. All right, child find, I said I would define it. So this is a legal obligation, also included in the IDEA, requiring LEAs to identify, locate, and evaluate all children who have disabilities and may be entitled to special education and 504 services. All children. We're talking about our unhoused kids, our kids who are homeschooled, all children. So this is a responsibility that we have. And sometimes they put the responsibility on the parents to say, well, you didn't refer, or, you didn't ask for one, or you didn't bring us documentation. This is our responsibility to find these students. And there are different ways that you can do that, like announcements in different places and sending it out at, at the beginning of the year. This is our responsibility, is to find these kids. So here are some of the things that you can look for that might indicate, that might elicit a child find referral that you can look for. So if they don't qualify for an IEP, it's not automatic. Like if they do evaluation for an IEP and they're like, well, you don't qualify, but here's a consolation prize. You can have a 504. That's not how it works. But it can be an indication that there is, if they get to that point, it could be an indication. If the parent keeps saying, I have this concern. It's not their job to keep saying it, but if they do, and I don't recommend denying an evaluation. Just there are very limited circumstances. Just do it. So if they're considering like discipline, looking at your discipline data, if they're considering suspension or expulsion, a pattern of inattention or not benefiting from classroom instruction. When they return to school after a serious illness or injury, and when I was a school counselor, it was so frustrating when I didn't even know these students were not in school because of a healthcare situation. Nobody would talk to me about it. And the school counselor can help integrate them back in. So we need to be working as a team. Chronic health condition, when a disability is known or suspected, or they have a record of one, which we don't always know. But if you are aware, if you know they're taking medication, that they're seeing an outside counselor, therapist, physician, or if you see signs of anxiety, depression, withdrawal, or a mental health diagnosis. So that's something that we can educate ourselves and our teachers and our, everyone in our building to recognize those signs. Sometimes they're not obvious. Okay. If you're looking at a plan, it differs from an IEP because an IEP includes specially designed instruction. And it requires documentation of measurable growth. And the 504 plan should be personalized, which the IEP is also. The accommodations and related services need to be personalized, and that they provide equal access to all public education programs and activities. If I don't drill that into your head after this, then I haven't done my job, because we need to know that it applies to more than the classroom. Now, here's some examples. These are just examples.
Holly, real quick before you go to examples, we had a
Question?
Yes.
Yay!
If a child has a 504, is there a manifestation determination done? If a child is suspended, do they have a limit on how many days they can be out of school?
They do. And it's very similar to students on an IEP. It's the same timeline. Some of the differences are the language that the law uses, but the type of services, if you suspend the child, like you have to be providing services for the child when it's complicated, but yes. And I have an entire webinar on that with my colleague who is in special education. So we go through what the differences are. So if you're interested in learning more about manifestation determination, and for those of you who do not know what an MDR is, it means that if you are considering suspending a child with a disability, you need to do an evaluation within 10 days of whether or not the behavior or what you're considering suspending them for, and it's usually not expulsion, but suspension. If that's that incident is based on their disability, if it's a manifestation of their disability. And it gets a little complicated too, because if we miss child find, you have to be evaluated for that too and be aware. So maybe that's a little bit more information, but a little more information is always good. So yes, MDR applies. Reasonable modifications of policies, practices, and procedures. Again, I could expand on that. Reduced homework or classwork. Auxiliary aids and services especially for our deaf students, our blind students, modifying textbooks or audiovisual materials. They need to have access to the general education curriculum. We're not excusing access to the curriculum and the standards. It's how it's presented to them, how it's delivered might need to change a little bit. Behavior management. Let's try to prevent them from getting suspended. Adjusting their class schedules or grading. So if we have a student who, I saw this with students even with anxiety. They have heightened anxiety in the morning. And so they can kind of decompress and then get to school maybe after first period. And so what we put into first period might need to be a little bit easier for them, or at least help them to get into the space. Like, don't put math first, is what I'm saying. Verbal testing instead of maybe written. You're going to have to be flexible with some of the attendance rules. This becomes a problem for people and in education to bend on some of their policies with attendance, but especially with our students who have medical impairments, they're going to have to maybe go to a lot of doctor's appointments. So we're going to need probably excuse some of those and make sure that we get them the information they missed. Nurses' office visits and accompaniment to visits. Occupational or physical therapy, yes, that can be under 504. Speech, OT, PT, these can be under 504, and you have to pay for them. This is unfunded, by the way. And mental health services. So maybe you have those available in your school, which would be helpful, but whatever it is that student needs. Wow, I sped through this. I'm like at the end, so we're going to have lots of time for questions. I know.
Good deal. All right.
Well, I'm sure it's all clear as mud at this point anyway, so you're going to want to ask me questions. I mentioned earlier that intervention period is not required. So whether using RTI, response to intervention, MTSS, a multi-tiered system of support, I mean, it's good to be like, you've got your tier 1 interventions that are great, but we need to exercise our child-find obligations to look for those who we need to go, but you don't wait and see. It's highly discouraged when there is substantial evidence of a disability. So if you suspect or believe there's a disability based on the evidence you have, you should conduct an evaluation.
Real quick.
Yeah.
So this might also require the input of our teammate, Julia Armstrong. So I'm going to say that as I'm asking the question. So the question in the chat is, for foster students, does the 45-day rule apply, or does our 30-day rule apply in this case? Julia, do we know, is 504 part of that conversation? You're on mute, friend.
I don't know if it is, I guess, Holly, I don't know if it crosses over, but the 30-day rule does apply to an IEP request that they have 30 days. I don't know if it transfers over to 504, but unless it's specifically said, Holly, then I would imagine, I've never seen it specifically said under the 504 policy.
Are you talking about evaluation period? Yes.
Right. Yeah. So under special education, if a caseworker requests an evaluation for an IEP, then they have 30 days rather than 45 days to do that.
Just
for
in
students in foster
special to in foster care.
Yeah.
Okay. Because special ed law is 45 days, and it does not indicate what that window is. Like 504 law doesn't indicate what that is, but in the courts, so a lot of 504 is determined not just by the regulations, they're pretty sparse. And so it depends on resolutions from the Office for Civil Rights, which governs Section 504. So the Office for Civil Rights, which their staff just got cut in half, and it's horrifying, especially because 40% of the claims to the Office for Civil Rights are disabilities. Just going to throw that out there. I'm mad. So, and I have every right to be knowing this law. And so, and you all do too. We have a right to be mad whenever we want. So, so a lot of the courts, and I don't remember which case, but, or where it came from. So it's either a hearing, case law, someone who actually sues the district, or OCR. The 45 days came out of some of those. And so if there's any doubt, kind of leaning on special education is the safest way to go if there's no delineation in the law. And 45 days is what we have determined. It's state by state too, but in our state, I say do it within 45 days. And some things that are like clearly obvious, you should not take 45 days. So our students who have diabetes, who have, severe asthma, who have you should not be waiting 45 days. You can take care of that like right away.
More immediately. Here we have another question. You mentioned substance use and alcohol use being part of 504. Do they need to be diagnosed by a doctor with having these in order to get a 504 for students?
No. And that is something I really want to emphasize. And that is at the bottom here, that no medical diagnosis or official paperwork is required for Section 504 eligibility. This is one of the requirements for 504 is you need to be collecting, you need to retain your data. So if the Office for Civil Rights were to come in to do an investigation, they're going to say, what's your data that you used to determine eligibility, to determine the accommodations and related services? So you got to keep your data, but your data can be anything. And it is not legal to require documentation unless you're going to pay for it. This is supposed to be a free, appropriate public education, and some of our students don't have health insurance. Some of them don't even have a car to get to a doctor's appointment. It would not be fair if they have a disability that that you are saying you need to have this documentation and they do not have resources. So that happens all the time where they're like, well, we need a note from a therapist. We need a note from a doctor that you have ADHD. No, unless you're going to arrange for every little bit that's going to get them to there. And it requires multiple sources of evidence to determine eligibility. So why are you going to just use that when you can't just use that? You have to look at different things. So if we're talking about, drugs and alcohol, drug and alcohol use, whatever it is that helped you or that made you find out what that is. Now, there are some different things that go into specifically illegal use that get more into manifestation determination law. But in general, if you have that knowledge, yes, because there's something behind that, right? They're not just using substances. There's peer pressure, but there's something behind it and why they're doing that. So there may be a disability, but it's not just because they're using. Did I get to all of that question? Okay.
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. So we talked about that substantial limits are not meant to be a demanding standard. It's really emphasizing those changes in 2024. Once the evaluation, we talked about 45 school days, and then it applies to all programs and activities. So those are the things I really wanted to drive home today, that are often misunderstood. And again, when I'm talking about paperwork, you also have parents that are coming in and say, I have a doctor's note, my child has ADHD. You have to give them a 504. And sometimes the healthcare provider writes it. It's so weird to me because I'm just like, you don't even work in a school. Have you ever worked in a school? How do you know what's happening in a school? And so that's ridiculous. That needs to be decided by a team in the school. Or in the LEA, whether or not they qualify. But it's great. It's helpful information if they bring it to you. There's an accommodation. I was going to tell you, I want to see if you know the two that I took out that are on almost every single 504 plan. Who can figure out what's missing from this list?
While you're looking for what's missing on the list, let me know when you're ready for another question, Miss Holly.
Well, Amanda, you can answer it too.
Well, let's see. Okay. Hmm. I'm not. I think because I'm used to the fact that it's not an exhaustive list, I'm not sure what's missing, to be honest. Let-
Preferential seating and extended time.
well, I was curious about the extended time for testing, but I thought maybe that was a reasonable modification.
It can be. And so I left them off because it's not appropriate for every child. So don't put it on every plan. I'll tell you, research shows that for ADHD, extended time does not help them. Um, and kids with ADHD are that is always on the plan because they think, well, they can't concentrate, so they just need more time. No, 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 no. They need chunking, they need like spacing things out. So I did not put those. They are maybe appropriate for students, but they are always on the plan. You'll see it now. If you see plans, you'll see.
Okay, so in the chat, we have a question. How can we help with the stigma of a 504 and help parents who are not wanting that label for their kids?
That is an awesome question and so hard. Because it depends on the disability, right? Like recently I had a student who I think they were having concentration issues. Some of our neurodivergent students who are autistic or sometimes they prefer disability language first, in case you're wondering why I'm calling them autistic. It's a like a community thing. But they need like dampening headphones or earbuds or things like that. And especially when we're getting into like devices in schools that are going to be changing, they're going to stick out. So the headphones, some of them need music. Some of them need their phone in order to access their accommodations, and they don't want to stick out. And I've been asked, well, how do they handle it? Uh, and so, there are ways that we support them. But yes, the students and the parents are saying, I don't want to be a person who's in special education, who's in that special ed classroom, which we're trying to avoid more so with inclusion, with students with disabilities, but helping them understand sometimes that it's a non-discrimination law is helpful, not a special education law. And so you say, this is to protect your child from discrimination and to provide them with their needs. They're not in special education, which I'm not going to cover any stigma for that because that's hard. And just say you're not going to be out of the classroom. We're just going to give you some things that what you need so that you're able to learn and experience all the things that the other students are that you're feeling like you aren't. But there is no way to take it away entirely, but helping them understand it's a totally different law so that they understand it's discrimination, where they're being denied services can be helpful, and just working with them. So saying, how can I help you feel like this is, do the accommodations and related services that you're going to be comfortable with, but will still provide your needs. We want to help you make sure you have the best experience, and working with the parents that way to help take away some of the stigma. But you're not going to just completely take it away. Some of that can be helpful when you're working with them and clearly communicating what the law is and what it does.
You, Holly, I think that's what I would recommend is, knowledge is power, and the more they understand about the situation, hopefully the more benefit they see to engaging in the process.
And I'm going to tell you something parents don't like. Once they consent for that evaluation, actually, kind of their only rights from that point forward is to appeal a decision from the team because they don't have to be on the team and they don't have to agree with the plan. But they do have rights to request a impartial hearing. So they don't like it, But if it's going to be something that serves the child to help them access education and the parent might be in the way, that is sometimes what happens. So that's something to know too.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. So a question, can the students test in another location or have verbal reply to tests? Are those part of the reasonable accommodations?
So when we're talking or testing, we're talking about like for curriculum. Is that what we're talking
Yes.
about?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it depends on the child. So you might have a child with severe anxiety, and part of that anxiety is speaking in front of their class to do a presentation. So in that case, you'd give them perhaps a verbal test one-on-one, or you'd give them a written test, or you'd let them turn in a PowerPoint. So that's just, and you know, perhaps that with kids with dyslexia, things like that, it's going to be more helpful for them. The only requirements is they have to have access to all of it, to the general curriculum. You can't like lower the standards, but you can change the way that there are demonstrating competency.
Yeah, agreed. But one of the accommodations I am familiar with my own student was like in math, he had to do every other problem. So he was still getting a good amount of homework done, understanding concepts and all and that, but that worked for his needs.
And that is a great example.
Thank you. I have
It is.
you know, some of our educators, that came from the school. I love it when they have the
Good.
recommendation. Yes. All right.
Yeah, that's
Put in
great.
the chat that I'm dying to know if you've heard of this before. So one of our mentors has a husband that's a driver's ed teacher, and he's currently dealing with students who want to wear earplugs during driver's ed. How would we tackle that situation?
Because we're talking about the necessity
I'm guessing maybe.
for hearing around you, like sirens and things like that.
Yeah. And
Um,
how would you deal with that? Well, and even the driver's ed instructor in my head, you know.
I would work with someone who, because you know, there's disabilities that like this might have more to do with our autistic students that have sensory sensitivities. I would work with someone who specializes in auxiliary aids and services who might be able to provide uh, some some ideas on how that could be handled because there might be some things that we've got so much technology out there that there might be some things that would help with that that I'm not aware of. But yeah, I mean, if it's a safety issue, if it's the safety of the child and others, then you can't put in an accommodation that is going to put their or another person's life at risk. So, looks like Julietta.
Yes, I have a question because I have two different scenarios on my IEPs. One where we were, my student didn't qualify for an IEP, but at that moment, they decided to do a 504 there, and they went to it. They did it, they created, and everything was done that day. But I have another scenario where the school decided to do not. They decided that the kid will need and require a 504, but the SPED department decided not to do it at that moment and do another meeting for that. So what exactly, and I didn't know because I told them what experience I had before, doing the PIO for there because the testing was done, everything was there, and they were saying that the PIO 4 was going to be created. So I was kind of confused because I was thinking, what is the right procedure, is we can do the EP there or we need to wait for to do it. So either way, both schools did it what they needed to do, but I was kind of like I don't know what was the right thing to do or what is what we're supposed to be requesting at the meeting if the school doesn't want to do the 5 at the moment at the IEP.
Okay, so are you asking? I think I'm thinking of two different directions you might be going with your question.
Mhm.
Are you asking if they're along with the IEP, they need to do a 504, or are you asking if they don't qualify for an IEP, can they immediately do?
No, probably I didn't explain myself. When the first example it was that I was on an IEP,
Okay.
my student didn't qualify for an IEP, and
Okay.
then the team decided to do a 504 instead. So the 504 was done that day, and we were okay, right? Like the 504 was done. But on my next, on the other example that I gave you, we were there on the IEP and my student didn't qualify, but the school decided, or the special ed team decided to do the 504 in another meeting. So the caseworker was asking me, is that okay? Why we don't do it right now, right here? And I say, I don't know. The school, they do things differently. I don't know exactly, So my question is, when is the
I get
what
it.
was
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
right thing to do? To do
I
the
get it.
504 at the moment of the IEP when everybody was there and the testing was done, or to do another meeting because the specialists say that they need to do another meeting to do a 504.
That's technically correct, that they need to do another meeting.
Okay.
But they can do it back to back, but they need to understand that 504 requires its own evaluation.
Oh, okay.
But they can take, like, if you're there, you can say, okay, we've got this information, like the data you have from the IEP meeting is useful data.
Mhm.
And that's why when I was saying it's a child-find trigger, is if you see that they didn't qualify for an IEP, they might qualify for a 504. So yes, it does need a separate evaluation. They can use the information from the IEP, but and they can do it like that. It makes it difficult when they do it simultaneously, one after the other. It makes it a little difficult because to differentiate, those have been two different evaluations. But it also is very inconvenient. You already have a team who's knowledgeable, who knows the placement, who can interpret the data. But to make everyone come back together on another day is very inconvenient. You just need to make sure you're delineating a separation. The best way to do that is your documentation. But it's like both are right as long as the first one did it right, the way, it's not, like I said, it's not a consolation prize. They need to determine that if this student has a disability of one or more major life activities or a substantial limitation, which they don't always determine with an IEP. What kind, are we looking at eating, breathing, sleeping, learning, all of those things. They need to determine what is substantially limiting. And it's not just learning. Does that make sense?
Yeah, probably because the first one, when they proceed to do the 504, it was because it was a psychological and educational testing that it was done. It was kind of like a complete. Now that you're saying, probably that was why they decided to follow up with the 504, because they did a psychological and educational evaluation together, like and the other one, it was more about education, like what the education,
their mental health needs, and
exactly. So the thing is, probably that's why they decided to do the next day, but I'm not pretty sure honestly, I'm just telling you because
they can do
knowing
it
what
both
you're saying
ways.
now,
As long as they do it,
Uh-huh.
they separate them out as far as how they're defining the disability, and making and documenting what that substantial limitation was, rather than because the main difference, like I was saying, is the specially designed instruction. So they're not requiring specially designed instruction on a 504, or and measuring growth and those kinds of things, making goals and measuring growth, things like that. It'd be great to do that.
Yeah, but just to to finish, the ideal is that they do a different meeting, right? So they can test whatever they need to.
Yeah, but I also, yes, it needs to be a different meeting, but maybe you wait 10 minutes and let everybody take a bio break and then come back.
Yeah, I just want to be sure because sometimes most of the time that I do an IEP or process an IEP, my caseworker is there and he won't answer or something. And I'm at that moment I was thinking, is the school decision? Is no.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
always respect the school decisions, and
Yeah.
I proceed with them.
That's nice.
But
As
it's
long
good
as
to
they're
know.
following the law, that's
I
cool.
know. Yeah. Anyway, but thank you so much for the answer.
Absolutely.
Let me
Um,
go.
yeah, if there's another question, please.
Let's see.
I've got, oh,
No,
I,
you're good.
I'll give you like 2 or 3 minutes.
I'm not seeing anything in the chat. It was
Oh,
actually just
okay.
more comments about our driver's ed conversation, so we're good.
Oh, okay. Yeah, talk to your specialists. See who knows, like if this is an autistic child, if this is a depending on what their substantial limitation is. So if it's a sensory issue, that kind of thing, talk to a specialist who might know some alternatives. Don't expect to be the expert in everything. I have people, I'll do research for people, but mainly because I'm interested in it. It's not my job to necessarily research everything, but I get interested in what would serve kids right, and depending on the disability. And there is a lot of variation, but I'm not an expert on everything. But you do have experts out there that you consult with. We have a saying around here. I've been around almost 7 years. Amanda's been around way longer.
I mean, yeah, but 7, that's awesome.
So yeah, we have a saying because I've been, involved in a lot of things, and I kind of know who to talk to if I don't have the answer. So better call Hall. Um, that's all my information. Oh, I put Title IX. I copied the Better Call Hall slide for my last Title IX presentation, so I'll change. I copied just that one slide. So I will I'll fix that because we have different resources for 504.
Okay.
But the QR code, yes, I need.
All right,
You did
excellent. In the chat, we have someone who says they have a question about 504. Lisa, if you can do it in 2 minutes, we have about 2 more minutes with Holly. You're welcome to come off mute and ask your question.
Okay, so it's a specific accommodation. The student has anxiety, depression, struggles really bad. On the accommodation, it says that she needs to, when she notices something's happening, that she needs to advocate for herself to get that 2-week extension on. Yeah, so she has to advocate for herself to get that 2-week extension. And when the episode occurs. And the problem with that is she doesn't realize she's in a horrible depression, anxiety, state to even find that out until after that 2 weeks would already be up. So should that be changed on the 504?
Oh, hells yes.
Okay.
That is not okay. So the plan is what we are going to do for the child. The child is the one that has the disability. It's what we are going to do. Now, you can make goals with the child, but this is a legal commitment. And so
this is actually for my daughter.
Oh.
She's a senior now. But yeah, she struggles, so she doesn't attend school all the time. She tries to get her work done, but unless she talks to the teacher before that 2 weeks is up, then she doesn't get the accommodation, or they take late points or whatever. So she barely passed her English class just this last term. But yeah, she doesn't realize she's in that type of state until it's way later.
Yeah. And whoever's serving her needs, they're not going to necessarily be able to recognize all the signs, but we need to educate them as much as possible. And if they are aware of this disability, then they can kind of be more proactive if they're seeing there's some assignments that are being turned in late or whatever. They should be more proactive. And when we're getting into extensions on assignments and stuff, then that can get really complicated. But the answer is no. They should not be putting a responsibility on your child or anyone else's child. I've seen that too. this peer is going to walk them out to recess with their wheelchair. It's like, no.
Okay.
And anytime you hear the words can't, shouldn't, won't, we do that for every child. These are keywords that I do not like because on 504, that is not, no, you need to have everything written into the plan that that child needs, that individual child. So I don't like those words.
Yes, they said in consultation with the teachers, on the actual 504. So that, yeah.
Nope.
Okay.
No.
Thank you.
Yep. And I don't feel passionate about that at all. I don't feel passionate about any of this.
I love your passion, Holly. Thank you for bringing it. It's always a joy to have you present. And I love that we thought you would end early, but as I'm reminded as the questions come up, that 504 is a complicated conversation and questions do arise. We are so thankful that we have Better Call Hall so that we can call you and find out the answers to these questions.
Yep. That's why I'm here.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, friend.
Yeah.
Well, I know you have to hop off for another meeting. Thank you. We'll see you again soon. All right. So Miss Michelle is here with us. All right. I'm getting my screens. I see faces. Finally, there we go, Michelle. Let me make you a co-presenter so that you can share and have all the fun. All right. Hey, you should be good to go. Perfect. Give me 1 second. Sure. It always takes a minute to get everything set up. And I'm happy to monitor the chat and just holler if you need anything. Sweet. Can everybody see this screen then? Perfect. I'm seeing you shake your head, Amanda, so that's awesome. All righty. Well, welcome. My name is Michelle Knight. I work at USBE as a Threat and Crisis Response Support Specialist, and I support a lot of our mental health and suicide prevention programs. So I am here to help have this conversation about how to talk to elementary students. And so first things first, navigating difficult conversations with elementary age students is essential for their emotional well-being. And so this presentation aims to provide strategies and insights on how to effectively communicate with children about challenging topics, fostering their emotional well-being. In this presentation, we'll be discussing Utah's confidentiality laws, exploring children's emotional and cognitive development, creating a safe environment for discussion, and discuss effective communication strategies. We'll also be providing support and resources for parents and caregivers and emphasize the importance of follow-up support. So the hot topic before we even begin is confidentiality, and I'm sure all of you are aware of HB 281. We will be getting into that as well. So 53-9-203 is the Utah Code, which requires parental or guardian consent on specific activities and protected topics. So those protected topics are listed on the right. I'm not going to go through all of them, but essentially it's any psychological or psychiatric examination, test, or treatment, or any survey, analysis, or evaluation that reveals information, personally identifiable or not, about the student or family. That is what needs parental consent. And then, like I mentioned, those protected topics could be anything from political affiliations, family relationships, religious affiliations, so on and so forth. Ideally, each school would have a policy for each protected topic, but in general, the USBE answer is just don't ask any additional questions until parental consent is obtained. Unless the student is describing self-harm, attempting suicide, or considering hurting themselves or others. If a student brings up a protected topic, that doesn't mean that you have to end the conversation. It just means that you cannot inquire or ask further questions about the protected topic, and that you have to inform the student that you need parental consent if they want to talk only about that protected topic. But again, if the student is describing self-harm, attempt of suicide, or hurting themselves or others,
then there are guidelines about asking additional questions. When is it okay to break confidentiality as a school employee? So here's some information and the codes that it is listed on. So 53G-9-203 is the Utah code. R277217 is the USBE code. In the school setting, it can be tricky to maintain confidentiality, but these laws are actually here to protect you as individuals. Just remember to follow the code of ethics, and you can be a collaborative action towards change without breaking confidentiality unless necessary. So this is where that kind of gets a little shifty. And furthermore, HB 281 updates. So there is a lot of concern that therapy is happening inappropriately. So we want to be careful that we aren't giving the impression that we're doing therapy with kiddos. We want to support them and be there for them. If they're having a tough day or if they're just needing to chat, but we are not diagnosing them and we're not providing ongoing therapeutic services or treatment. We should not be asking probing questions or processing any feelings with them. And so that is kind of this HB 281 update. So only authorized personnel, and that includes school psychologists, school social workers, or DOPL licensed mental health professionals, can do any kind of mental health services. All other staff can provide stress management. They can make referrals and connect to appropriate help. They can emotionally support a student during a crisis situation until the student can access the appropriate help. Now, that is a tricky sentence as well, because during a crisis situation, even if a student comes, the day after a crisis or a week after a crisis and it's in relation, that is no longer considered a crisis situation. So we want to be really, really clear that a crisis situation is like right there in the moment as it's happening. But if someone comes to you following up, then that's already not a crisis situation, and that's where you just have to refer and connect to appropriate help. Okay. So understanding children's development when we're chatting with them. Elementary age children typically range from about 6 to 12 years old, depending on the school system. They're developing reasoning skills, but their understanding of abstract concepts is still very limited. So knowing their developmental stage helps tailor their conversations appropriately. Emotional intelligence is also still developing in children, and they need guidance from adults to help them identify and sometimes express their emotions. It plays a crucial role in their social development, enabling them to navigate relationships and social situations. Additionally, emotional intelligence is essential for building our resilience, as it allows children to emotionally regulate and cope with challenges and setbacks.
So before you go any further, we did have a question in the chat 2 slides back about, is a school counselor part of that short list of staff? Yes, this one.
The mental health, to provide mental health, I don't believe so, no. Any other questions?
That was it.
Oh, perfect. Okay, I'm gonna jump forward. Okay. You also want to be aware of common fears and themes that school-age children are experiencing at this time. So children often experience anxiety during transitions, especially when separated from caregivers. So it's important to recognize these fears and support their well-being in these manners as well. Additionally, understanding common themes such as family issues, school challenges, bullying, and health concerns can help those children feel understood and supported. It's really common for these hot topics to come up when talking to kiddos. An effective communication with children requires using language they can easily understand and avoid complex jargon. So simplifying complex ideas can help them grasp difficult subjects and stay engaged. Additionally, using relatable examples and language that connects to their experiences can make learning more enjoyable and impactful. And we're going to get into that in just a second. Another thing you really want to do when talking to kiddos is creating a safe and open environment. So that includes active listening, which involves giving your full attention and showing that their words are important. You want to acknowledge and validate their feelings and create a supportive environment that fosters self-esteem. Encourage open dialogue, and promoting empathy helps children express themselves freely, build strong connections, and enhance communication and trust. Building trust begins with consistency, honesty, and showing genuine interest in children's thoughts and feelings. Nurturing a trusting relationship encourages children to share openly. Things that you might do when talking to a kiddo, especially at this young age, to encourage conversation and build rapport are things like going for a walk, playing basketball, maybe doing some art, playing a card game, things like that. Kiddos love to be hands-on, and typically when you start focusing their body in a hands-on way, then they're more freely open to their mind and able to speak more freely. And it encourages conversation. And it's fun. Encouraging children to ask questions also nurtures their curiosity and helps them feel valued. Allowing them to express their feelings fosters that emotional intelligence and helps process their thoughts. Providing clear answers builds trust and supports understanding. Open-ended questions promote deeper conversations, critical thinking, and enhance articulation skills, boosting their confidence. We want to be careful when talking with young children not to be asking leading questions. Leading questions subtly suggest a desired answer, prompting them to respond in a particular way rather than sharing their own thoughts or experiences. Some examples of leading questions could be something like, "Did you see him hit you?" Which suggests that, someone hit the person and that it was that person. Something like, "You were at your friend's house, weren't you?" Assuming that they were somewhere. Or something along the lines of, "After that person did X, did they then do Y?" Which suggests a specific sequence of events. So a better alternative is those open-ended questions. So instead of leading questions, asking open-ended that allow children to answer in their own words and provide more details. Simply saying something like, "What happened? Tell me more about that. Can you describe what you saw?" That allows them to answer without having prompts and suggested desired answers.
Michelle, I think that blends nicely into the question that was just asked in the chat. It says, as mentors, if we're not allowed to talk about feelings because we're not on the approved list, how do we validate feelings and help them feel open talking, or keep them open and talking freely?
So we can still validate what they're saying. Again, if it's one of those protected topics, it's when you need to have parental consent involved. But validating them, saying, "Wow, that seems so difficult to be dealing with. Oh my goodness, I can't," like things like that, is still very much okay and very much encouraged. And then what was the second part of that question? Sorry.
You're good. So I think it was just, how do we keep them talking open and freely when we're, concerned about what we should be saying, I think is the question.
And that is a really difficult time to be, especially with House Bill 281. So we want to continuously validate. We want them to know that they're always welcome to chat with us, that we want them to be able to talk freely. However, that is when those conversations of confidentiality comes in, where you have to tell the student or whomever, if we get into these topics, I will have to get parental consent, or I'll have to refer you to my colleague who is a school social worker, or things like that. It's complicated. I wish I had a better answer for you. but there is really no right answer to that one, unfortunately. The best to do is to just keep trying to build that thought or that trust and rapport, keep encouraging them to be open with you or with, the school psychologist or whomever it could be that they're referred to, and also continuously validate. Validation is something that all of us can do no matter what. And so, yeah, I'm sorry that's not a better answer.
I think that's just where until some additional clarification comes, I think that's just the best that we can give at this time. So thank you.
Yes, and there will be, as now that House Bill 281 has passed, there will be additional, what am I trying to say? Clarification, as you just said, Amanda, coming from USBE with support. A colleague of ours, Tara Kay, is working on that, and I can provide her contact information if you guys have further questions on 281 or anything in this realm. Okay. Good to go to the next slide. More creating a comfortable and effective communication environment. So we want to include choosing a quiet atmosphere to minimize interruptions and ensure that a child is in a receptive state of mind. Both physical comfort and emotional safety are crucial as they encourage open communication and allow children to express their thoughts and feelings without a fear of judgment. I always like to make the example of you wouldn't call a kiddo out in the middle of class to come up to your desk and talk to you where all of your other students can hear them. That's one. And second of all, if you've got, your phone in your hands, if you're staring at your computer screen, that's not engaging. That's not active listening. And they will pick up on that. And so being able to put all of that away, minimize distractions, and have that quiet atmosphere is ideal. And understandably so, if you're outside playing, basketball, that's fine as well. But maybe having just a one-on-one court instead of having, an entire gym class happening right next to you, things like that. Open discussions are crucial in preventing misinformation as well as reducing anxiety in children. So again, by fostering trust through these conversations, we can promote healthy emotional development. And additionally, recognizing signs like behavioral changes, withdrawal, and increased questions can help us address children's needs effectively. If you are recognizing signs, that might be the best time to start actively referring to another mental health professional and/or obtaining that parental consent to kind of dive deeper into those signs and symptoms that you're seeing. We also want to keep an eye on how the child reacts to the conversation, as this can provide valuable insight into their understanding as well as their emotional state. But again, we want to be careful not to make inferences on what they are thinking and feeling. We don't want to attribute meaning to their reactions as is like, oh, they're depressed because they said they were sad. We want to make sure we're taking notes on the student and using factual observations when taking notes. So something along the lines of like, they put their head down on the table. That is descriptive. It is what it is. And there's no inference on it. It's not, they're so sad or they're so depressed that they had to take a moment and put their head down. No, we're just putting down the facts. This is especially key if you are sharing notes with a colleague as well as if you're sharing notes with the parent. You want to make sure it's strictly facts written down. So some effective communication strategies are kind of listed here. So we want to recognize and acknowledge our own feelings. We want to achieve a calm mental state through techniques like meditation, which we did earlier, I saw, and deep breathing, which helps manage feelings of overwhelm. We want to maintain our composure and demonstrate emotional regulation, which fosters a supportive environment. Just like when you get on a plane and the pilot says, put your oxygen mask on first before putting it on somebody else, we want to use our mirror neurons. The student you're talking to, and honestly, this is accurate in anything you're doing, people will match your energy. So remember that you're always modeling behavior, and what you are doing, the person you're talking to is going to match as well. Provide support and resources. So if a child is struggling to cope with a difficult situation, professional help may be necessary. Like I mentioned with those signs and symptoms, signs that a child may need support include prolonged sadness, changes in behavior such as withdrawal or aggression, difficulty functioning in daily activities, behavioral changes, so on and so forth. So recognizing these signs early can ensure the child receives the necessary guidance and support. And then, of course, if needed, connect the child and the family, if that's whom you're talking to as well, with additional resources such as counseling or support groups. Providing comprehensive support can greatly benefit their emotional health. And then whatever is in your own schools. So if you guys have an on-site, contract with, Wasatch Behavioral or Bear River or whomever, connecting those support systems using Safe UT if possible, or if necessary, whatever supports they may be. And it might not even just solely be mental health supports. It might be, 211 resources or things like that as well. And lastly, we want to always make sure that we are establishing open communication with regular check-ins to show children they are valued and heard, while encouraging expression helps them feel safe to talk about anything. We want to provide support and ongoing reassurance to reinforce their sense of security and strengthen that emotional bond. Regular check-ins are important because you're not just telling the kiddo like, hey, I'm here for you, and then you never talk to them again. We're checking in on them. We're letting them know we're here for them. We're letting them know that we're available to talk or to provide resources or support or whatever they may need. And it's not just a one and done. We're hoping to build that rapport. And last but not least, it's always important that you support yourself. So if you ever feel overwhelmed, don't hesitate to seek support from your colleagues or other professionals. Having a support system in place can help you navigate these conversations more effectively. And so we want to make sure that you are caring for the caregiver as well. And that is the end of my little presentation. Feel free to contact me. As I mentioned, I'm going to put Tara Kay's, she is our school-based mental health specialist. I'm going to put her email in the chat, and she is open to any questions, concerns you've got about HB 281. She did help me create this presentation, so she is very open to communicating with all of y'all and answering questions.
Well, awesome. It was the day of quick, I guess. Not surprised based on who we had presenting. We all talk, but no, you're good. I appreciate it, Michelle. So, awesome. Kate, well, we have a few minutes now if there are questions specific to Michelle's presentation, but gosh, I just love that, first of all, you use words that just speak to our mentors, I feel like. And for me, it was very validating because I feel like, those relationships, those are just the key to everything with our students. So, all right, any questions real quick with Michelle, or are we ready to hop into breakout rooms, my friends? Let me get the chat open again. Okay, I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Michelle, are you good to hang on for a breakout room?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, well then on that note, I'm going to make breakout room number 1 with Michelle. Let me see who else I have on the call. I've got Shirlene Hicken, who is one of our boots on the ground, mentor, trainer, counselor, all the things. I'm going to make breakout room number 2 if you want to go in and ask Charlene any problems of practice, things of that nature with Check and Connect. And then let's do breakout room number 3 with, I see Garrett Russell and Julia Armstrong, my 2 co-trainers here at the agency. We'll throw them in a room if you have any questions about upcoming training or data collection, those kinds of things. Let me get the breakout rooms open. Oops, that's not the right button. Bear with me just a moment. All right, so there will be 3, like I said, Michelle in 1, Charlene in 2, and then Garrett and Julia in 3, and those should be open, and you can just choose which room you want to go to. Okay, now they should be open. Sorry, one more button. There's always one more button. And if you're struggling with technology, you're welcome to throw it in the chat or come off mute, and I'll put you in whichever breakout room makes sense for you.
Hello.
Oh,
Amanda, just